Welcome to the Villanova University Center for Irish Studies podcast. My name is Joeph Lennon, and I am the Emily C. Riley Director of the Center and host of this podcast series. Villanova's connections to Ireland extend back to its founding and continue to this day. We offer a major and a minor in Irish Studies and have 6 study abroad programs to Ireland. We teach in 8 disciplines and host distinguished visitors to campus. This podcast aims to share some of our conversations and expand the bounds of our community beyond campus. Thank you, and feel free to share. I'm here today with Cauvery Madhavan. Welcome, Cauvery.
Thank you, Joseph.
Cauvery was born in India and moved to Ireland 37 years ago. Her books, Paddy Indian, The Uncoupling, The Tainted, and now The Inheritance, published by Hope Road, have won her critical acclaim and a wide readership. Sebastian Barry, who's the laureate, picked The Tainted as one of his laureate picks in 2020, and Sebastian was a Heimbold Chair here. You currently live with your husband in County Kildare?
That's right. Yeah.
And have you been in County Kildare the whole time?
We've lived there for the last 25 years now.
Yeah. And so, just for our listeners, why did you go to such a rainy place such as Ireland from sunny India?
Well, I was a young bride just following my husband. Doesn't that sound so goody two-shoes? But on a serious note, no, we came to Ireland because my husband had just qualified as a doctor and, he wanted to get his fellowship exams, surgical exams. So we came thinking we might be there for maybe 4 years at the most.
Oh, right. Really?
Yeah. And
that was in 87?
87, yeah.
So there was a different Ireland then, and a different West.
Gosh, it was a completely different country altogether.
The Inheritance takes place in Beara in West Cork around that time, 1986.
Yeah.
So that's a time that maybe has that been cemented in your mind as a kind of Ireland that was?
Absolutely, because. When I came to Ireland, and I've said this many times before, that, when I was 23, leaving India, you had this notion, it was the first time I was leaving India, first time I had left India. And you had this notion that the West was just, sex, drugs, rock and roll. and then I arrived in Sligo, could not have been more conservative.
Right.
And also coming from such a big city, such a big metro as Madras, now called Chennai, with I think maybe 7 or 8 million people at that time, to Sligo, which had 15,000 people.
Right. So you're kind of doing the reverse of the Cousins and moving to Chennai they were in the north. And the James and Margaret Cousins spent 40 years there and 40 years in Ireland.
Yeah.
But you'll be even longer in Ireland than they were.
That's right. Yeah.
So I have a bunch of questions, and I just want to have a discussion with you about what it's like to be a migrant writer in Ireland. I mean, I know you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
In the United States, we are a nation not entirely filled with migrants, but with a lot of immigrants and children of immigrants, descendants of immigrants. And Villanova University was founded by immigrants for immigrants. So we're very conscious of what it means to go from one place to another, what we bring, what we leave behind. What do you think is a thing that you have brought from India to Ireland?
Oh, that's really interesting. What I brought from India, I suppose, is, it's as a writer, I think I brought that that Indian nosiness.
They call it gossip, I think.
Yeah, and I think you kind of need to be a nosy person to be a writer.
Yeah,
I think
true.
Because, and even if you're not overtly nosy, you definitely need to be observant
and interested in others.
Yeah, and interested in other people. And I know that when my children were young, they'd be embarrassed because if somebody was serving us in a restaurant, or if I met somebody randomly in a queue, I'd get into conversations and it'd be squirming. Like, do you have to do this, Mum? Kind of thing. But I think that I'd say would be the main thing that
chatting with community. You mentioned somewhere that your neighbors are like your sisters.
Absolutely.
And that you found a new family.
Your neighbors then become like hyper important.
Yeah.
Because it boils down to stuff like, if I have to go to the dentist, who's going to keep my kid? Who's going to collect my child from school if I have to take the other child to the doctor?
Right.
So, our neighbors became our everything. And honestly, in the last 30 years, we've lived in Strafford in the same neighborhood and same road for the last 25 years. But in the last 30 years, even before that, wherever we went, our neighbors made our lives easy. And I think that's because there's a lot of similarities between the two cultures. So when I moved to Strafford, for example, I found that my neighbors, the women on my road, had the same issues, the same worries, the same hassles, the same joys,
family worries.
Yeah,
family
and they also had the same, very similar, if not same, kind of anxieties, and so we were all on the same plane.
And it's interesting that people shared them. That, I mean, as in a small town, people would.
Yeah.
But that you didn't get a sense of distance. You had a sense of people opening up.
Yeah, and I think that's just a very, very peculiar Irish thing. So, and I think I've said it somewhere in the book, in The Inheritance, I think, that you're kinder to strangers.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely in Ireland. You're kinder. Well, I mean, you're more accepting of strangers in especially when you move to a rural small community. Okay, so this is Marlowe, my main character, who has just arrived the night before, and he was actually heading down to Glengariff village, looking to maybe, just stock up the fridge and stuff like that, and he meets his immediate neighbour. I was headed to Glengariff for supplies. There's nothing in the cottage, so it's very kind of you. She's just invited him to come in for breakfast. So sorry, I'll start again. I was headed to Glengariff for supplies. There's nothing in the cottage, so this is very kind of you. Sure, it's no bother at all, Marlowe. Just being neighbourly, seeing as we're going to be neighbours. Marlowe, it's a strange name they gave you. Did your mam pick it, or your da? Wait, let me see. It was your mam, wasn't it? She would have picked that name. They say she had notions, but they'd say that about anyone who'd want to better themselves, they would. She was best off in London, you know what I mean, in the company of strangers, with no one minding her affairs for her. Marlowe had his mouth full, and he nodded non-committally. The dogs were on either side of the spindleback chair that he was sitting on, Blackie alert with expectation, and Spot nudging his thigh gently. I'm going to have to keep Azumta on my side. Imagine if I told her Mary was my mother. It's Marlon, actually, but no one ever calls me that. Marlon? Agnes was a queer one, all right. Don't get me wrong now, I liked her, your mam. She'd not know me, really. I don't think she'd remember me even, seeing as I was much younger. I was still in primary school down below in Youngfields, just across the river. The Dutch family own the place now, Peter and Ella. Still foreign in their ways even after all these years. I was in Miss Casey's class, the time when your mam and Neely, when they found out that, that they had to marry. Sure, it's no secret, I don't mind telling you. And didn't it all end so well? Your sister Mary was baptized the same day as my younger brother. Agnes and Neely took the boat soon after that, and we never saw them since.
What was your particular attraction to West Beara, and did it have to do with this history?
Well, what happened was, Joseph, I actually wrote Paddy Indian, my first book. I started it in Beara in a writer's retreat down in Anamkara, yeah. And so, and I literally, when the first time I laid my eyes on Beara, coming over the Kusan Gap from Dublin, I just fell in love with the place, So shortly afterwards, we decided to buy a place in Beara ourselves. And we bought a small cottage, old small cottage in Glengariff at a time when, it was affordable many, many years ago. And, we've lived there, I'd say, I've been there a third of the year, every year for the last 25 years. I spend a lot of time there writing. and because of that, I knew the story of O'Sullivan Beara.
Yeah.
But I was also aware that not many people outside of Beara know the story of O'Sullivan Beara.
Can you give us a summary?
Yeah, sure. So O'Sullivan Beara was in the 1600s, early 1600s, was one of the last chiefs, clan chiefs, to hold out against the English. And in the end, in December 1602, he was hiding in Glengara Forest. They'd been there for over 6 months. And overnight, overnight the English somehow managed to find out where the cattle was kept, and they slaughtered over 5,000 head of animals were slaughtered. So, I think 3,000 cows and 2,000 sheep were slaughtered in the one night. And that field is still called Derrinafulla, field, the oak field of blood. And so when he found out that that they had lost their cattle, literally within a few hours, he made the decision to leave Glengariff and march to Leitrim, which was in the far north of Ireland, and roughly they say between 1,300 and 1,500 people left. Left behind in the forest then were all the elderly, the infirm, women and few women and children. But the bulk of the people who left, they left on the 31st of December, 1602. It was the coldest winter in memory, and they took 16 days to reach Leitrim in the north, where they finally got shelter with the O'Rourke's, but only 35 of them arrived alive. So it's quite a harrowing tale, and I think one of the reasons, and this is only my own theory, I'm not a historian, so this is just my own theory from having read about him, that I think the reason it's not very well known in the rest of Ireland is because it was such a matter of shame that, he was killed. It was Irish on Irish. He and his followers were killed by other Irish people. And I mean, that's hardly something that, bards would sing about.
Right.
So it was just covered. It was a story cloaked in shame. It
reminds me of the Pakistan, India.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great migration there.
Yeah. So, So, I mean, I've known the story for over 25 years and researched it a good bit just out of interest. Then I had at the back of my head kept thinking, one day I'll write a story about the march of the march.
Yeah.
But eventually, when I did end up writing The Inheritance, it wasn't about the march. It was about the people who were left behind.
Yeah.
And their situation was even more pathetic.
Right.
So.
Thank you. Beara is very dear to me, and I've spent time up in those mountains, crossing over, going from Kenmare to Adrigall and other places.
Yeah.
It's a windswept place, and it's also a place that's way out toward into the Atlantic. When you're there, is it a sense that I guess I don't know how to ask this question except to say, nature there's been some rewilding movements to try and recover nature. There's a sense of people having left there. There's a sense of people holidaying there. Do you see this as, I'd love to hear you just talk more about how memory informs your sense of the landscape. Do you see it as a landscape that's been harmed, or do you see it as a landscape that's coming back? Do you see it as a wild place, as
it's interesting,
a vacation
actually.
land?
It's really interesting, Joeph. You ask whether I see it as a place that's been harmed, and it actually has, and it is actively being harmed. And the thing that is causing the harm is the rhododendron. This invasive species has completely changed. In the 25 years we've had our house, it has changed the landscape around our house. And it's such a shame because even in areas where there is no grazing and no deer, normally you would expect then native species to come back. But because of the rhododendron, the intense shade, the toxic leaves that fall, it absolutely just ruins. It's ruined the landscape, and as tourists, when people come as tourists in May and in the flowering season, you see these massive, just absolutely stunningly beautiful walls of magenta pink. And they really are just walls of pink. Everywhere you look, there's this glorious flowering. But it is a terrible beauty.
Killing,
it's just killing everything. So, and in terms of, memory and literally, if I just only have to step even 500 meters out of our home, and there's famine cottages, that have been sort of consumed by growing brambles and trees and stuff. So everywhere you look, there is the memory of great sadness that's passed. Whether it's the famine, whether it's post-famine, or even going much further back.
O'Sullivan Bears.
Yeah. O'Sullivan. And in fact, if you go to Dursey Island, which is just off the coast, and has this amazing cable car, over the sea, you on Dursey is the O'Sullivan Vault. And there's a ruin of a church, St. Mary's Church, and there's the O'Sullivan Vault, where, all the O'Sullivans have been buried. But that vault had been closed up 200 years before O'Sullivan Beara's time.
Really?
So it's so ancient,
Yeah.
So imagine, even for O'Sullivan Beara, that would have been a historical site.
Yeah.
Like when you think about it.
India has a similar time scale issue. In the United States, I'm an O'Sullivan. My mother's people were O'Sullivans and Nicholsons.
Wow.
And,
okay.
But so I have O'Sullivans there. But it's also, for me, it's about being, I grew up in a different land. I grew up in the United States. And for me, always going back meant something else. I wonder if you or your children have that sense in going back to India. You go back to India rather frequently. Do your children have a sense of being migrants or being hyphenated identities?
Yeah, no, actually, it's so strange. And I think a lot of it is to do with, when, as first-generation immigrants, and when we decided that, okay, we were going to make Ireland our home, we kind of made a very, very active decision, a very specific decision. It was made on the one day, because I remember talking to my husband about it as soon as we got our citizenship and we knew we were going to stay on. We actually spoke about this. We said, okay, we're going to stay on here. We're going to bring up our children as Irish children, with Irish rules. We don't want them confused about where their identity lies. So actually, we ended up being possibly the most liberal parents on the road. We were literally the exact opposite of most Asian parents. We were very, very liberal. Our children did things that, our Irish neighbors.
So they grew up in a very Irish atmosphere.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway, the kids, as a result, I know. They're grown up now. My eldest is 34. They just think of themselves as Irish. They and if somebody asked them, they would say, "Oh, we are from Ireland. Our parents are of Indian origin." They realize that after 40 years of us being in Ireland, we've also kind of shed off a bit of our Indianness. And for many years, Joeph, I would have hesitated, and I would have said it only in guarded company, but now I have no hassle saying to anybody I'm Irish. I'm of Indian origin.
Right. That's lovely.
Yeah.
So you have a character in The Tainted who has maybe I'll let you tell us a little bit about The Tainted, where identity is a little bit more problematic.
Yeah. Problematic is, I think, the right word.
I was trying to find a choice word.
which is why the book was called The Tainted.
Yeah.
Because The Tainted, actually, the book refers to three separate groups of people. One was, the Irish Catholic soldiers who served in the British Army and who were tainted by the fact that they had taken the king's shilling, and they were ostracized when they came back.
And these are the ones even who became the Connaught Rangers.
Exactly, yeah.
And who had a rebellion.
Yeah. And despite having mutinied because of what was happening in Ireland with the Black and Tans, they were still not forgiven. They were still ostracized when they came back.
100,000 Irish soldiers fought in the First World War.
Yeah.
And that was for many, many years a legacy that people covered up.
Yeah, and families were ashamed, families that should have been proud that, their brothers and fathers stood up against fascism and Nazism. Right. It's a sad thing, So that was the one group of tainted people. Then the other group was also, they were the Anglo-Irish officers, who were in the British Army, who they were never English enough for the English, and they were never Irish enough for the Irish. So they were also kind of tainted by association, by their legacy of having been part of the British conquering of Ireland. And then the third group of people who I talk about in the book are the Anglo-Indians. Mm-hmm. Now, Anglo-Indians would be the progeny of, Indian women, and what in India we would have called English soldiers, but actually would have been English, Welsh, Scot, and Irish. And so they were children of mixed race liaisons, mainly in the main illegitimate, and
mainly women without much means.
Yeah, absolutely, women without means, because there was this crazy belief in those days. In fact, it was the official military.
I think I know what you're going to say.
And am I allowed to say it?
Yeah, of course, sure.
So it was the official military belief that abstinence in the tropics was dangerous.
Yeah.
So the British Army actually provided prostitute camps that were official, and they just traveled with the regiment wherever the regiment was, and it was called the Rag. And soldiers would be court-martialed if they went to prostitutes anywhere else other than the Rag, other than the official camp. So,
were those women who were not in were those women who were outside of a caste?
I mean,
or just
they would have been just, they would have been a ragtag group of women, who had just fallen into bad circumstances, and some of them would have been, would have actually been born in the Rag. Yeah, they would have been born in these prostitute camps and just sort of carried on the trade of their mothers. Now the British Army thought they were doing. The Raj army thought they were doing okay because, they had doctors to check out these women so that they didn't get syphilis and, all of that. And, there was this, there was a routine where, soldiers who went to the prostitute then had to go and clean themselves. There was,
the strangest country in the world is the past. Can I just say? That's the strangest country. Fortunately, we don't visit it except as tourists.
So the progeny of those, those. I mean, they were not all progeny of prostitutes, but they were all. The Anglo-Indians were initially progeny of just relationships, casual relationships, and very few were ever legitimized.
Yeah.
So they were tainted because the Indians wouldn't tolerate them, because of their origin. And of course their white fathers' people, whether they were Scot, Welsh, English or Irish, would have nothing to do with them either.
Do you know Rabindranath Tagore's novel Gora?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And which the chief and Kim, Rudyard Kipling's Kim, both have half Irish, half Indian.
Right. Yeah.
Characters as the titular character.
Yeah. And if you think that, if you know that 70% of all military in the British Raj were Irish.
Yeah.
70% of them were Irish Catholic soldiers. So you can imagine how many of the Anglo-Indians had Irish ancestry.
The English owned it, the Scottish ran it, and the Irish fought it.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah. So I mean, the Irish were they were the ones that kept the Raj going. And not just in the military, because don't forget, I mean, the Irish were there. They were there. They were running the courts. They ran the railways, the telegraph, the customs. They were in the jute plantations. They were
and then they stayed on in Catholic schools for years. I mean, you had Catholic educators who were Irish.
Oh, absolutely. I had Irish nuns right through my schooling.
Yeah.
And my university as well.
And your universities? Where did you go to university?
I went to Stella Maris College.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the University of Madras. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So can we talk for a moment about the Cousinses?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to.
So we have a shared interest in James and Margaret Cousins. I mean, they went there on a mission to sort of become to learn more about the universe. I mean, for them, India represents some deep wells of spirituality, and theosophy was what drew them there. But they quickly took on other things and became involved in politics and in education. Yeah. And James was much an educator, and Margaret got involved ultimately in the fight for the vote, and for women to have some autonomy. What drew you to thinking about James and Margaret Cousins? Because I think often when I'm in India, I'll ask people, especially if I'm in Chennai, do you know the Cousinses?
Yeah.
And people get blank stares.
Yeah.
No, it seems like they've been utterly erased or forgotten in
India.
India.
I think they lived in Annie Besant's shadow.
That's very true.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing. But what drew me to it was it's actually something that's that hasn't been fully confirmed. Okay, but the reason I wanted to include them in the book that I'm writing, my work in progress at the moment, is and my main character is going to be a gardener. I think a gardener come handyman come sort of houseboy, if you want to call it, in their home in Madanapalli, where they started the school, for girls.
Yeah.
And the reason, what drew me to them was the story that I heard that when Rabindranath Tagore visited them, on an occasion, he actually read out a poem, to the student body.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard that. Yeah.
And I've actually, I have, and I'll give it to you, James, Joseph. I have the photograph of the actual, his handwritten thing. I have a photograph. It's framed and kept in the school. Okay. And I'll give it to you. And what he read the poem out to the student body, and Margaret Cousins overnight set to music and got her students to sing it back.
Wow.
And that is the Indian national anthem.
Yeah.
Vande
Mataram.
Yeah. And I just think, no, not Vande Mataram. No, not Vande Mataram. It's Jana Gana Mana.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Jana Gana Mana. Yeah.
So I mean, that's such a little known story,
Yeah. Thank you for correcting.
Yeah. But I mean, it's an amazing story to think that the Indian national anthem was set to music by an Irish woman.
That's
like,
I know, and nobody knows that.
Yeah.
There was during COVID there was a recording of it of the national anthem.
Okay.
And it had voices from all over.
Right.
But there was no Irish voice in it. And I thought, this is a missed opportunity.
So I actually asked, I don't know if you know the scholar Jyoti Atwal.
No, I don't.
In JNU University.
Say the name again?
Jyoti Atwal.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So she
don't
has
know
studied.
Her personally.
Yeah,
but
she has studied Margaret Cousins as well.
Yeah.
And as you know, most people study Margaret Cousins. James Cousins has been left out. So I'm glad you're the scholar there.
And Sir Shendu Majumdar in Bolpur and I are he's done work on Cousins and continues.
And I asked her, I said, is it true? And she said, well, he did read out a poem, and the poem is the national anthem. And she did set something to music, but she said, there's no definitive yes or no. Did she set it to music? And I said, well, I'm a writer of fiction, and I'm going to.
I've heard that story.
Yeah.
I've heard it, at least in the Cousins world. It's a story.
And so when I visited the school, I was so thrilled to see the actual paper that he had handwritten it on is there framed and on the wall, and in the school record, I mean, it says that she did set it to music, and it was sung back to the poet, to Tagore the next day, and he was absolutely thrilled with it.
So I've long been interested in connections between Ireland and India. I don't often sit down with someone who also is fascinated by Irish-Indian affinities.
Yeah.
Do you think that these stories go back a long time, a long ways. Do you think that, well, just from your lived experience, people in Ireland recognize India as something that is familiar? I mean, if you look at the Indian flag and the Irish flag, you have the same colors.
Yeah.
But they're from different circumstances. And when I'm in India, sometimes people are like, Ireland, I'm not really sure. But writers, thinkers, historians, many have made these connections, including people in Britain, going back hundreds of years.
Yeah. I think it's that recognition is increasing now, just because of books and newspaper articles and I think historians sort of disseminating their
and some of it's an imagined affinity because we were both colonized, or Ireland and India were both colonized.
Yeah, I don't think it's imagined at all. I mean, there's 300 years of massive connections. I was just telling you about Gerard Ainger, having been the first governor of Bombay. And, like Ainger Street, all of Georgian Dublin was built on money that Ainger sent back from Bombay.
It's fascinating.
And, Professor Jane Olmeyer, that's her sort of body of research. But actually, it goes back even further, because the Sanskrit language is the root language for Irish as well, so
it's the same root. And I mean, I write about fasting traditions. And in the 19th century, many British were making connections between the Irish fasting tradition. Trosku would have been the medieval version, where you would sit on somebody's door and require that they adhere to a contract. And in India, there's very similar processes, especially in Gujarat, where if you had a complaint, one of the bhat or someone they were literate, they were bards in a sense. They were genealogers and keepers of records. You would go to them and they would perform a fast against the offending party. And so the British outlawed this in India, of course.
It's fascinating.
And eventually it came to be resurrected by a granddaughter of one of those men in the United Kingdom in the British suffragette movement. So I'm very fascinated in these. I think there's many possibilities.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of a book that came out recently written by Mankan Mangan.
I do.
Brahmins and Brahmins.
Yes, exactly.
And it's the most fascinating book.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
I
haven't read it yet. He may be in Philadelphia next year.
Yeah, it really and truly is an amazing book, because it's not one or two connections. It's like,
I know.
many.
I know, yeah.
Dating back to the Brahman times, so.
Yeah.
No, I am convinced that there's, that there's so much more. Like I think there's many decades of scholarship ahead, in digging it all out.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful for me to hear. And now here we are sitting in the diaspora of Ireland, and we'll just wrap up with this. Maybe I could ask you to read another passage.
Yeah, sure.
The overlapping diasporas, I should say, of Ireland and India.
Yeah. Would you like me to read the first page?
Sure, whatever you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's a very engaging novel.
Thank you.
You pick it up, and I love the subject, but it's your writing as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is literally the first page of the book, and the story starts. Glengariff, Ireland, April 1986. It all began the day he found out his sister was his mother. As the minibus hiccuped its way up the steep rutted road, Marlowe repeated that to himself. This journey started when I found out that Mary was my mam, and mam was my nana. The revelation had made his head spin for a good few days. In fact, his whole life was still spinning out of control nearly. Maybe things would be better now that he was finally in Ireland. At least that's what everyone had said repeatedly. It had taken him several weeks before he agreed that heading to the Beara Peninsula, to the old cottage in Glengariff, might be a move in the right direction. A chance to start afresh, son. Don't feckin' call me that, Mary. You'll never be my mam. She had teared up. Ah, Christ, don't be like that, Marlowe. It is what it is now, for God's sake. He looked at his sister and his mother facing him across the table in their new avatars as his mother and grandmother. You keep telling me no one in Glengariff knows, but are you sure? They both nodded. No one, not in Ireland, not even here in London. And Mam had reached out and took his hand in hers, squeezing it hard as Mary continued. Any other way and I'd have lost you. Mam wiped her eyes. Yes, Mary would have lost you. Do you even understand? 4 months later, at the airport, Mary had pressed a medallion into his palm and hugged him. Write every week and ring us when you can, won't you? Mom said there used to be a phone box by the Garda station in the village. Ring me at the surgery, Marlowe. I know Dr. Khan won't mind. Oh, I'll ring Mom when I can. Mrs. Kelly won't mind giving her a shout across the landing. Okay, but call me too. Now, as he peered into the darkness outside the bus, he ran his finger around the smooth oval edge of the holy medal in his coat pocket. St. Jude, what the feck, Mary? I'm not a fecking lost cause.
I love it. It's such a great opening. So that's from The Inheritance. Cauvery Madhavan, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to your next book.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you.